Picture Michael Jackson at 17 years old. Soft, round cheeks, a wide, natural smile, skin the color of caramel. Now picture him at 48. Sharp nose, pale skin, a face that looked almost sculpted out of porcelain. The world looked at those two pictures side by side and reached the same lazy conclusion. He hated himself. He wanted to be someone else. He cut his own identity apart with a scalpel. But that conclusion is built on a story that was never actually true. Behind every change in Michael Jackson's face was a war most people never saw. A war between his body and two diseases. A war between one surgery and the surgery that came before it. A war between a global superstar and a press machine that needed a monster more than it needed the truth. Today, we're going deep into the real medical history behind the most talked about face in modern pop culture. And by the end of this, you'll understand why vanity was never the real answer. Stay to the end, because the part about his final years will change how you see the last photos of him. And if you want more true stories behind the myths the tabloids sold you, subscribe before we start. The boy before the myth. Before any of this began, there was just a kid from Gary, Indiana, thrown into the spotlight at age 5. Michael Jackson grew up being stared at, analyzed, photographed under harsh studio lights from the time most children are still learning to read. He said later in interviews that his father used to mock his nose as a child, calling it too big, comparing it cruelly to other family members. Whether or not that's the root of everything that followed, one thing is certain. Long before Michael ever stepped into a surgeon's office, his relationship with his own face was already complicated by other people's opinions of it. That matters, because it changes the entire lens through which we should view what came next. This wasn't a man who woke up one day obsessed with fame and decided to reinvent himself. This was a man who had been picked apart by outside voices since childhood, long before a single procedure ever happened. And then, in 1979, everything actually started. The injury that started it all. Michael was 21, deep into rehearsals for a dance sequence, when he took a hard fall and broke his nose. The break was severe enough that it required surgery just to repair the damage and let him breathe normally again. While he was already scheduled for reconstructive work, and with his career about to explode thanks to the upcoming release of Off the Wall, he made a decision that seemed small at the time. He asked his surgeon, a well-known Beverly Hills doctor, to refine the shape of his nose while repairing the break. That single choice set off a chain reaction that would define the next 3 decades of his life. Because Michael wasn't happy with how the first surgery healed, he said it left him with ongoing breathing problems, issues that he claimed were actually affecting his singing voice. So in 1981, he returned for a second procedure, this time specifically to correct the first one. This is the detail almost nobody talks about. Nearly every nose surgery Michael Jackson ever had after this point was framed, at least in his own explanation, as a correction, not an upgrade, not a redesign. A repair job on a repair job. Once a nose has been operated on multiple times, the cartilage and skin lose structural strength, and the surgeon has less and less healthy tissue to work with each time. Michael had unknowingly stepped onto a medical treadmill that would be nearly impossible to step off of. But then, 5 years later, something happened that had nothing to do with vanity at all. The night the fire changed everything. January 27th, 1984. Michael was on a soundstage filming a Pepsi commercial, standing near a set of pyrotechnics timed to go off as part of the performance. Something went wrong with the timing. The explosion detonated far too close to his head, and in an instant, his hair caught fire. Witnesses on set described watching him keep dancing for a split second before anyone realized what was happening, before people rushed in to smother the flames. He suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns across his scalp. When the smoke cleared, a portion of his skull was left with a bald, scarred patch roughly the size of a hand. The recovery wasn't simple. Michael underwent a series of scalp surgeries in which doctors removed the dead, burned tissue, and gradually stretched the surrounding healthy scalp to cover the wound. This is a genuinely painful and slow reconstructive process, nothing close to a cosmetic touch-up. For years, he relied on wigs, hairpieces, and the wide-brimmed hats that became part of his signature look, all serving double duty as camouflage for a wound that never fully disappeared. That fedora everyone remembers, the one tilted just so during his most iconic performances, wasn't purely a style choice. It was survival gear for a burn victim performing under stadium lights. So, before a single so-called vanity surgery even entered the conversation, an accident beyond his control had already permanently altered his body. Keep that in mind for what comes next, because the next myth is the biggest one of all. The skin myth that followed him to the grave. For decades, one accusation followed Michael Jackson more than any other. That he was ashamed of being black, and that he bleached his skin to look white. It was repeated so often in tabloids and late-night jokes that most people simply accepted it as fact. He denied it every single time he was asked, and every single time, much of the public assumed he was lying. He told Oprah Winfrey directly, on camera, that he had a skin condition. Most viewers didn't believe him. Then, after his death in 2009, the official autopsy report was released. It confirmed what he had been saying the entire time. Michael Jackson had vitiligo, an autoimmune disorder in which the immune system attacks and destroys the cells responsible for skin pigment, leaving behind uneven, blotchy patches of light and dark skin across the body. Here's the part that clears up the confusion. Once vitiligo has spread extensively, leaving a patchwork of colors across someone's face, hands, and body, dermatologists sometimes recommend lightening the remaining pigmented patches so the skin tone becomes uniform rather than leaving someone visibly blotchy for the rest of their life. This is a recognized medical approach for severe, widespread cases. It is not the same thing as bleaching healthy skin out of self-hatred. People close to him later confirmed how much this disease actually affected him emotionally. He was self-conscious about looking patchy and uneven, particularly under the bright lighting of a stage or a photo shoot, and the treatments were his attempt to simply look like one consistent color again. That's not a man erasing his identity. That's a man trying to hide a disease the same way anyone with a visible skin condition might. The tragedy is that this misunderstanding didn't just follow him through gossip columns. It followed him through his own community's judgment, through late-night comedy, through headline after headline, for nearly 30 years, while the truth sat quietly in his medical records the entire time. The second disease. Nobody talks about. Vitiligo wasn't the only autoimmune condition working against him. According to people close to his medical care, Michael also lived with lupus, a disease in which the immune system can attack healthy tissue throughout the body, including skin, joints, and in some documented cases, cartilage. In Michael's case, it reportedly targeted the tissue of his nose. Combined with the cumulative damage from his earlier corrective surgeries, his nasal structure began to genuinely deteriorate rather than simply change shape by choice. By the mid to late 1980s, he was regularly photographed in sunglasses at public events, and observers began to notice his nose looked increasingly asymmetrical. By the 2000s, some doctors who had treated him described him using the harsh term nasal cripple, explaining that the structural collapse had become so severe that breathing through his nose was genuinely difficult. At certain points, he reportedly wore a prosthetic piece just to maintain the shape and function of what remained. Look at that timeline honestly. That is not the pattern of a man endlessly chasing a smaller, prettier nose out of vanity. That is the pattern of a man whose body and whose own earlier medical decisions had put him in a position where every subsequent surgery was less about beauty and more about damage control. The number everyone got wrong. So here's the question. This entire investigation keeps circling back to: how many surgeries did he actually have? Tabloids spent decades throwing around wild, unverified numbers, sometimes claiming Michael had undergone more than 50 procedures, reshaping practically every bone in his face. Michael Jackson himself only ever publicly admitted to 2 rhinoplasties and a later addition of a cleft in his chin. He once said, half joking, that the real number could be counted on 2 fingers. His autopsy did reveal slightly more than he had admitted to publicly, including small scars near his nostrils and behind his ears, a chin implant, and cosmetic tattooing on his eyebrows, eyelids, and lips designed to fake definition without daily makeup. A former associate of his longtime surgeon also claimed the real number of procedures was somewhat higher than what Michael acknowledged in interviews. But even at the higher unofficial estimates, the total number of legitimate cosmetic procedures falls dramatically short of the tabloid fantasy. There's no credible medical evidence that his cheekbones were shaved, that his jaw was reconstructed, or that he underwent anywhere near the number of surgeries the press loved to repeat. A huge portion of what did happen wasn't chasing a new look at all. It was firefighting damage from the burn, damage from the earlier nose jobs, and damage from 2 separate autoimmune diseases attacking his body at the same time. Add to that the media's favorite trick, placing an unflattering childhood photo next to a professionally lit adult photo and calling the difference proof of surgery, and you start to see how a fairly modest medical history got inflated into one of the most repeated urban legends in celebrity history. Put all of it together, and a very different story emerges than the one most people grew up believing. A broken nose that triggered a lifelong cycle of corrective surgery. A fire that scarred his scalp and forced years of reconstructive treatment. An autoimmune disease that destroyed his skin's natural pigment and led to skin evening treatments mistaken for racial self-hatred. A second autoimmune disease that slowly collapsed the structure of his nose. And on top of all of it, a media machine that profited every single time his face looked slightly different from the last photo. Michael Jackson's face didn't change because he despised who he was. It changed because his body was fighting battles the public never saw, while the public was busy writing headlines about the battles they imagined instead. That's the real story, not vanity, not self-hatred. A man dealing with illness, injury, and the unbearable pressure of being photographed from every angle for 40 years straight, while the world decided his pain made a better punchline than the truth. So the next time this topic comes up in conversation, you'll know what actually happened. Let me know in the comments which part of this surprised you the most. And if you want more deep dives that separate real medical history from decades of tabloid noise, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this story still to uncover.